Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, member Vincent Gambini shares his very unlikely path from a Big Four consulting position to a lucrative private equity fund, how he positioned himself at the Big Four in order to be more attractive to PE firms, a key piece of advice to his younger self, and how he got his big break. Enjoy. Vincent Gambini, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Yeah, happy to be on. Thanks for having me, Patrick.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a quick overview of your background.
Yeah, of course. So undergraduate degree in economics from Georgetown University. Didn't have an all too stellar GPA, probably slightly above a 3.0 or little around there. Originally went out of school to Big Four consulting, along the lines of like traditional consulting group, so strategy and operations, not necessarily a deals group. Really wanted exposure to M&A and to the world of private equity, and was able to make the leap from the kind of strategy and ops consulting to a mid-market private equity firm in New York that specialized in technology investments, and was there for about 3 years before going to business school, where I'm now at Chicago Booth.
Great. So thanks for that. I think your background is actually really a little bit shocking in terms of, if I'm being honest. So we see people coming on this pod and just in the community themselves not being able to break into private equity from top investment banks, yet you were able to break in from what's considered even a harder place, which is like the Big Four accounting firm. Now, obviously, you weren't doing accounting work, correct? When you were at the Big Four, you somehow managed to get into a group or do certain work that was more attractive to PE. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would kind of classify it as like the traditional management consulting work.
Got it.
So doing, projects for clients in either corporate strategy or looking at like operational improvement opportunities.
But you weren't at a McKinsey, Bain, or a BCG. You were at a Big Four, and you were still able to make that leap. So why do you think that's the case? If you had to look back and say to yourself, hey, I got into private equity because of X, Y, and Z, is there something you can kind of point to? Is it just, I don't know, because you didn't do, you went to a great school, but you didn't do amazingly well there either. So is that, first off, let's kind of rewind and start back there. Is that kind of, with your GPA, were you recruiting for banking out of school? What happened there? Was it just like, hey, I'm just going to go to Big Four because I want to go Big Four? What can you give us a little more information there?
Yeah, for sure. Because I do think it's kind of an interesting part of the story. And I think anyone who might have been in a similar boat, maybe, flirting with majoring in engineering might have suffered, similar GPA troubles that I did. But ultimately, I think I didn't have as many doors, open upon graduation. The 3.5 cutoff, I think, is a very real thing for recruiters. And my junior year, I actually decided to intern at like a hedge fund of funds, kind of on the investment management route. But, quickly realized that, being away from companies is a very different kind of investing. You're sort of a few layers up. And so when I returned to campus, that fall, I was still interested in maybe banking. But consulting was starting to seem a little bit more attractive to me because I wanted to stay close to, strategic projects at actual operating companies, even if I was going to bring that investment perspective.
And so did you feel like
kind of read that?
Were you getting any looks from banks your senior year? Or like, I know the GPA, you said the 3.5 GPA cutoff seemed to be a real thing. Does that mean you were dropping your resume for banking positions and just not getting selected, or did some of your networking get you a first round interview?
Yeah, I actually had a banking offer even
Great.
out of undergrad. I think, they weren't with bulge bracket banks, but they were with, solid banks in New York that, I knew that I put in a couple of years, I would absolutely get my shot at switching to private equity. I think, so I had that, and then I had this Big Four opportunity where, to be honest, it was it's not a big recruiting pipeline from Georgetown, but I had just gone to a job fair, met a few people who I really connected with, and felt like it'd just be kind of a fun place to build some operational chops over the next few years, and a good place to launch a career. That was kept my options open.
Right.
And when I kind of compared those two offers, I think it was an easy decision for me.
Was the bank you got an offer? Was the bank you got an offer from? Did it not have strong deal flow? Was it just you felt like it wasn't as good a match or something? Like, can you be a little more specific about why it was obvious for you? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people would jump to the banking job.
It wasn't a huge. Yeah, it wasn't a huge brand. Definitely would be recognizable, I think. It's kind of middle market advisory.
Yep.
But to be honest, during the Super Day and stuff, just didn't feel that connection. And for me, at least, it's kind of I think a big decision people have to make when they're making the decision between banking or consulting. It's kind of where you want to play in the investment world. If you do go to private equity, do you want to be more of a deal guy? Do you want to work on deals where maybe the debt component plays a larger role in returns? It's more about leverage, and a lot of the emphasis is going to be on the financial model. Or do you want to maybe go a little bit smaller company? You want to go to the middle market or the lower middle market, where maybe having a unique view of the commercial side of the business, and diving a little bit deeper into the commercial diligence rather than the financial diligence, and trying to take a unique approach to strategy might be where you play as an investor.
You feel that's just at the lower middle market, there's just a lot more funds that are looking for kind of people who are strong operators versus transaction deal guys. Do you feel like that's the case?
Or even just a little bit more emphasis on that skill set.
Okay. That's fair.
I think this is something I just kind of came into by chance. So I definitely didn't know this when I was an undergrad. But the fund that I ended up going to, very intentionally recruited 90% consultants and 10% bankers.
Interesting.
And I know they did that because, they played kind of almost in the growth buyouts kind of space, where we would probably put 2 to 3 times leverage, which isn't a ton on businesses. So debt really wasn't a huge component of, our returns. And to be honest, when businesses are growing, let's call it mid-teens, a lot of the success in the investment is going to be derived on, from sustaining that growth rather than anything else within the LBO model.
Trying to cost cut or anything like that. So
that's where we would focus our diligence efforts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and if you think about
what were the deal sizes or the checks you guys were cutting? Rough ranges. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but
Yeah, I'd say pretty broad, but I'd say most fell within the 25 to 75 equity check size. But we've done a few handful that are bigger than this. But I would say that's kind of our.
Well, it's not tiny then. It was a pretty good size. And the fund was probably at that size. My guess is the fund was around $1 billion or a couple billion, or a little under, around there, anywhere between 800 million and a couple billion.
I'd say,
or no,
a little under $1 billion.
Okay, yeah. So that makes that check size makes sense for that. You can't do too much smaller. You'll never get it all put to work. Or
I think, we would err on the side of being very concentrated. So it might actually surprise you, how big of a check we would write compared to the size of our fund.
Okay.
but I think as I talk more about the fund and kind of how, we operated, I think that'll start to make more and more sense.
Cool. So do you think now is a good time we maybe go back to a little bit in terms of the recruiting? And so maybe we could talk a little bit about first recruiting at, the interviews for the investment bank and the big four. How were they? I'd love to hear how they were different, how they were similar. We can kind of start there and then talk about the transition.
Yeah,
Sound
for
good?
sure.
Yeah.
So starting with kind of the coming out of undergrad.
Yeah, it'd be great just to hear. Yeah, just to hear a little bit about that. It'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So this is I kind of mentioned how I kind of came back to the campus in the fall, knew I didn't want to go the investment management route anymore. So we're, trying investment banking consulting broadly. And I think I even threw my resume out to a few kind of like rotational leadership development roles.
Yep. FLDPs.
I don't know if I went too far with any of those. Yeah.
Yep.
I'll say for banking, I think they still had a very formal process. And I think this has to do with Georgetown as an undergrad spot. Very strong finance school. I think that pipeline is very well established. So most of those interviews are like on campus, first rounds, maybe after a phone screen with someone in HR, but then, fly to New York for a super day.
Do you mind if I ask you, I'd be surprised with your GPA, you were able, in such a competitive school, you were able to even land more than a, one or two first round. I assume there was a relatively low hit rate, or were you somehow able to kind of still get the first rounds through some sort of networking?
So there was a fairly low hit rate, I'd say.
Okay.
I was pretty well prepared, and there's definitely like a story that I would tell behind my GPA, right? It has to do with like switching from a very technical, side of the university to graduating with a degree in econ. I wasn't necessarily being grouped apples to apples with my peers.
Mm-hmm. Did you have an econ or major GPA and then like your cum right next to it on your resume, I assume?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's basically what I tried to do. And I also, I think I was like my second semester junior year, I was like Dean's List or something like that. So I threw that on there just to show that like, look, there's a story here.
Right.
But to be honest, something like that doesn't necessarily jump off the page in just a resume.
Right.
So it really took the getting in front of someone and explaining it to them. So at a very high success rate from like first round interviews to second round.
Right.
But a pretty low from like resume drop the first round.
That's what I would assume. Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. Sorry.
Yeah. So you can continue. And the opportunity I ended up getting at the Big Four Consulting wasn't just a resume drop.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of a nuance of being at Georgetown, but a lot of the consulting firms that go to Georgetown recruit for their like DC offices, which do almost all like federal consulting work. And for me, like knowing that I want to do something like maybe like private equity in the future, like federal consulting would have just put another step that I needed to take. Like eventually I'd need to switch from federal to commercial, to get involved at companies before I'd be able to make the jump. So I needed to kind of get a little creative there. Like I said, I ended up meeting, a few folks from the firm at a job fair on campus.
Did you have to travel to New York?
They were actually there
like did you end up traveling?
So I ended up traveling. They did like one interview when they were on campus interviewing MBA students.
Okay.
They interviewed me just in that time slot, which ended up working really well.
Perfect.
Because it kind of put me in like a different category. And I was able to, to kind of get to their super day, which their super day, I don't know if you're familiar with the pipelines of recruiting that some of these Big Four firms have set up.
It's a monster.
But like their super day was, I think it was in Virginia at like this hotel that was like more of like a compound, but there had to be like 1,000 kids doing super days on the same day.
It's nuts.
And it was just a crazy, crazy animal. But definitely like kind of seeing that beast and seeing how it's organized and and how many kids are going through that pipeline, it's pretty astounding, and it kind of gave me confidence that it could be pretty cool. At least, a good place to expand my network, if not a good place to launch my career.
So tell me a little bit about the actual interview and maybe the super day at the Big Four versus the bank. Obviously, obviously the Big Four was massive, and the bank super day was probably like 1/100th the size. But yeah, besides that,
I think so. I'll start with the bank. I think this will be pretty typical of readers that have read stuff from the the IB forum. But first round they're going to throw some technicals at you. Make sure you're doing the prep necessary for a banking interview. I think for a lot of people in that they were also very interested in my decision to not pursue investment management. Mm-hmm. I think it's like I had that down pat. I was like, look, I want to be closer to the companies. I think that was pretty well understood, but just because they were working in finance, they were curious. My investment management internship was at a pretty big name, so they were curious about kind of hearing why I would not go to a place that was so well known.
Did they push and ask why you didn't have a return offer? Did they push you and be like, hey, why aren't you going back there? Or did you have a return offer and you said you didn't want it?
Yeah, and I had a return offer. I think I knew that it really wasn't for me though.
Yeah.
So I did say, I got a return offer. Wasn't the right group, wasn't the right area. Maybe not the right time in my career to make that, to make that decision. But I wanted to do something, where I, maybe focus a little bit more on gaining a skill set that was transferable.
Yeah, and to be clear, for the
banking or consulting,
the listeners, just so they understand, that your internship was in a fund of funds, which means you're not it's not a hedge fund where you're making direct investments in, say, public companies or doing the analytical research on the actual buy versus sell decision. You're actually investing in different managers, correct? So you're doing analysis on the actual funds. So I think it's important for the listeners to understand why you might have been more hesitant. Because a lot of people are like, what are you doing? You could have been in a hedge fund right out of school, or you could have been, I think people need to understand a fund of funds is very different because you're not making direct investments. You're actually doing more of the analytical, a lot of your analysis is on the specific funds themselves, right? So I just wanted to make that clear to listeners.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, you can continue.
Honestly, I think it is a cool role. Looking at funds, meeting with managers, hearing about their strategies, hearing about how they, derive alpha. But out of school, there's just not a ton of like that fundamental, Excel modeling or, critical thinking and problem solving.
It can
these other roles.
It can pigeonhole you too. It can pigeonhole you.
So the exit options from that are not, I don't think are super broad. I think the best exit opt that I've heard of from a fund of funds role is like, maybe you can get into like a co-investments group.
Yep.
Or you can go to a hedge fund and be kind of like their, fundraising or, investor relations.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I'd say, I guess back to like the investment banking super day, which, I actually did a couple of these. So I was ready for it. They end up being like really long days, at least. They fly you out on like a 6 a.m. flight, at least for me, it was from DC to New York.
Mm-hmm.
You basically spend, I think I spent, most of the morning doing like 3 or 4 interviews, and getting progressively to more senior people bank throughout the day.
Yep.
I maybe had 2 different styles. One of the banks had like, maybe 10 to 15 kids come in the same day to do their super days. So it was kind of like everyone's like, switching offices around the building, and you're, seeing your peers going through the same thing.
Do you mind sharing the names of these banks since you didn't end up going there? Just for the listeners.
Yeah, sure. So I had Guggenheim was one of them. Oppenheimer was another, and then Harris Williams.
Okay, great.
Like a third.
Thank you. And get some good context.
So you kind of get the, kind of the tier, the context. I think generally good banks. I think they're, they're probably even better than they were, a few years ago when I was kind of going through recruiting. But I think it was either Guggenheim or Oppenheimer. They did kind of the bring all the kids on one day and shuffle them around the office. And then like you meet and like have lunch together and talk to the recruiters. And then I think in the afternoon we did all the partners or like the managing directors. And I think there's definitely a heavier technical emphasis in the morning, right? When you're speaking to the kind of to the analysts and to the associates, they're the ones that are really going to drill you on knowing your technical stuff, maybe how well you know accounting if it's not on your resume,
right?
And really, because really what they're trying to discern, not only can do you know a few things, have you done your homework? Because banking is a job that's very much about enthusiasm, and if you didn't have the time to like put in the effort to learn the technical skills and some of the equations, then it's like, how are you going to have the enthusiasm to stay that extra 5 hours to scrub different
That's a good point. That's a good point.
On a deck. It's really just a pure effort decision, and I think that's really what they want out of their analysts, right? They want you to be able to say, I'm willing to roll my sleeves, I'm willing to do the work necessary, no matter how repetitive it gets, because you want to be in the industry, you want to be around the table when people are discussing deals, and it's kind of a trade-off you're willing to make.
For sure. Cool, man. Okay, so then
I think I'd say the last thing I'd say on that super day is that the MD conversations, by the time you make that stage in the day, the conversation is more elevated. MDs, I think, are more curious about why did you pick your major, or what industry you think would be like the most interesting to work within, and the conversation definitely gets lighter, but they're still trying to solve for the same things, So I don't know. For me, at least, I was able to relax a bit more and more throughout the day as you move up in seniority.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty typical. The junior bankers are the ones tasked with grilling you a little bit more, and the senior bankers usually haven't even looked at your resume until you walk in the room, and it's just like they pick something from your resume to chat about. Very cool. It's interesting. So, and then you want to just quickly, how did that differ from like the Big Four, that huge kind of machine down in that hotel? Was it similar? Were there any kind of, was it technical, or was it more just trying to get a feel for you?
Well, so I did have a case interview there. Okay. And I think, case interviews are a little bit lighter at the undergrad stage than they are at, kind of at the MBA level. But I think first round, I didn't have a case. It was just fit, it's just a fit interview. Yeah. Behavioral questions around like maybe experience on a team or like leading a team, pretty typical question, like tell me about a time you failed, maybe something testing your intellectual curiosity, like, what's your favorite class you took in undergrad? Because I think, teamwork, intellectual curiosity, pretty common thing, and that you have to demonstrate.
For sure.
But as far as kind of the super day, 1,000 kids kind of stayed overnight at this big hotel complex.
So crazy.
Everyone's nervous because you got the case interview. I'd never done a case interview. Yeah.
Had you done any mock case interviews? Had you done? I assume you practiced before.
I didn't do any mock ones. I read Case in Point. Yeah. And did some on my own. Yeah. And you can kind of practice that way. I think it's honestly, I'd say that's enough prep for an undergrad consulting interview. I don't think the cases ever get too intense. I'll say the case itself was, kind of you sit in a room, you do like one fit interview, and then they're like, just so the next person is going to give you this case, take out a pen and like a sheet of scratch paper, and get ready. And, I think people have an idea in their head of like a case interview is going to be like a brain teaser, or something that's like trying to trick you. But really the way they're written, I think, is very logical. And they usually don't push too hard on the math.
It's not about can you do tricky math in your head. It's about can you think logically of what's important about the company and the industry and stuff like that.
Right. And if
Right.
there is math, probably just testing, like, how are you paying attention? Because it'll be something that's like, you have to know that the units are like in millions instead of billions.
Right.
And like, if you're talking about people, like, know that if you say anything about people in like the billions, it's probably wrong. Stuff like that. That's like, they're just trying to get a sense of like, do you realize what you're saying?
Do you have common sense?
Did you accidentally stumble and say, this company will make $5,000 if they make this investment? And it's like, is that a lot of money?
No.
Well, no. So, it's like stuff like that. That's like testing, if you're actually listening to yourself.
Got it.
This one, which I think that's the case, it makes a lot of sense. This is a classic strategy and operations kind of role. This was a supply chain case. And they just gave us this sheet of paper that was really just a diagram of a factory floor. And it said, kind of there were 4 stations on this flow chart. And I forget, it was an assembly line for like TVs or something. It just told you, how long it took however many people to perform that task on, one unit. And they kind of slide it across the table, and they're like, take a few seconds, make some notes if you need to, just try to figure out what's going on here. And then you slide it back, and, she was like, well, what are you looking at? So first you walk them through, like, basically proving, yes, I can read a graph. This is a workflow for a TV. There are 4 different steps in the production process of a TV. First you assemble the components.
It's an operations case. Where's the bottleneck? That type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next step, you beat me. It's like, then they come back and they're like, all right, well, like, where's the bottleneck?
Right.
And then like, so you're like, okay, right here, it's step 3. And then they're like, how do you know that? You're like, well, there's only 2 people working there. It takes an hour per TV. So without even seeing the factory floor, I know that's where the bottleneck is.
Right.
I'd be like, well, what should we do about it? You say we should hire more people, or we should invest in technology at that step. And so I think, pretty straightforward case.
Right. Very cool. Awesome. So you obviously were successful during the interview process, or you wouldn't have gotten the job. And so you ended up getting the job, and then basically, tell me how that's how that went and how that started.
Yeah. Consulting firms are great. They have their own, training sessions when you start out as a new consultant that are a lot of fun. You learn how to make PowerPoint slides, learn how to like work in a team and, problem solve and, start to work on your presentation skills. Which, might be a little bit different than, a training program at an investment bank, but never gone through that. So I don't know for sure. But I think one of the things about, these big consulting firms, especially in the Big Four, is that the staffing process can be a little bit of a black box. These firms do a lot of different projects in pretty much every industry. And so you're really just like kind of dealt cards your first project. And you might have some influence on a sector that you're particularly interested in, or a type of work, like if you really want to do supply chain stuff. But it's on you to find out what that is and really network internally, to make sure that like if a project comes up where they need an entry level consultant, and it's in your area of interest, they make sure that they staff you.
How do you even know that? Is there like a staffer that that's basically, all the jobs are coming into? Are they posted anywhere? How do you even know how to advocate for those? Or is it just kind of? Yeah.
So it's the way I viewed it. And I know this isn't consistent with all firms, but to me, it's like, if you don't have a project, like there's kind of a clock ticking in the background. Because if like you don't have a project for like a week, they're just going to give you one. So I always saw those kind of like the beach time opportunities as opportunities to network with the people, kind of managers and that I just generally liked, or that I had heard were working on interesting cases. And you kind of pitch yourself. you say, you know what, I love doing healthcare work. I heard you guys are working on a proposal or working on a project for X healthcare company. I'd love to help wherever I can. And maybe that's, helping put a slide together for the proposal, but even a sign of interest, as small as that can move you to the top of their list. For when they need to go to staffing, they'll say, hey, is Joe free?
Right.
Can we grab him for a project? But it is a lot of emphasis on internal networking ability, which, is necessary when the firms are so large.
For sure. For sure.
I'll leave it at that.
I think we've heard that consistently in all these conversations I've had. Is just, if you want to get yourself in especially at a large firm like a Big Four, you need to really just almost know how to maneuver yourself internally. If you want to switch groups, it can be touchy. If you want to, get on the right projects, it can be touchy. You just have to be smart about how you do it and build relationships in the right places. But okay, so you're there, you're doing well, you're getting on some interesting projects. What, I guess, you knew right away you wanted to get to private equity before you had even started at the Big Four, or it was something that kind of, can you tell me about that thought process and kind of how the types of projects you were looking to be placed on in order to set yourself up?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you had asked me when I was in, kind of consulting, maybe like for a year or so, I was going to give private equity recruiting, pre-MBA my best shot, without a doubt. Part of me thought maybe I'd have to make an extra move, and that this was like kind of a post-business school play for me, but I wanted to give it my best shot. I wanted to see if I could get there after, the 2 years kind of standard stint in consulting. And in order to do that, I think, I really sought out cases that I thought would speak best to, that investing skill set, when I finally got in those interviews. Didn't always work. I think some of my projects were kind of just like placeholders, and I just tried to kind of get the work done, get high reviews and kind of move on. But, there were a couple that I knew would be great things to talk about in my private equity interviews. And so those are ones that I really chased down. And I'll give you an example of a couple of those.
Sure, that'd be great.
Maybe the not so good ones and the really good ones. Because I think that when it comes down to it, like, there's a skill set that's kind of universal to consulting that you need to communicate. And then there's kind of these particular cases that have components that are very relevant for, M&A or private equity transformations. That can be that kind of that extra bit of experience that, will really, pique someone's interest. So one of the really good projects that I got on pretty early was a kind of like a corporate venture capital case. This big Fortune 500 company was looking to start a new division for, in a new market. They had kind of looked at the M&A opportunities in the space and already decided that they didn't like any of them. So they were going to start their own venture, and they needed our team to work with kind of the future CEO of that venture to build a financial projection model, build a business case from a market diligence and customer diligence perspective for why, they would be successful in this market, but then ultimately arrive at a number that was like the amount of startup capital that they would need to kind of get.
And so to, the CEO was already
long-term profitability,
and the CEO was already tapped. Like, they already had identified the CEO, or was something like you guys were okay.
Yeah. And he was really, they'd already found the CEO, and they basically given him, a couple $1 million to run this study and to start, kind of picking people within the big, Fortune 500 company that he wanted to be on his team.
Got it.
But it was up to us to work with him to really put his vision on a paper, do financial projections for the first, 5 years or so of the venture, figure out, what scale they would get to, how many employees they might hire over that time. And then, continuing to kind of just, understanding that he had an audience that was the CEO of this Fortune 500. He would eventually have to take that model and, our presentation that we built around it to that CEO. And maybe that CEO had to take it to the board to get, funding approval for this new venture.
Right.
And it's kind of like making an investment case. And that's what I saw when I read like the initial overview of the project, which is why I was like, this is one that I just jumped at.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And, you have to have a little bit of foresight to read the project summary or whatever, internal system is being used at the big firms, and to just say like, this sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like a skill set that is very relevant to investing. And if I can get on this project, I will be able to take away, something very tangible.
Absolutely.
For my skill set. And so that was when I went for pretty full force.
Awesome. So you got it, obviously, and that was like a big feather in your cap for your CV, for your resume. So you were like, and so then I assume you got maybe one more kind of like that, or maybe one or two more that were good. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say I probably had two more. So I'd say like I got to like 3 solid cases that I talked about. Yeah. And I guess briefly on the other 2, one was like a competitive diligence.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, we're in this market with a main competitor, kind of like a Coke Pepsi situation.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we don't know why, but like they consistently have higher margins than us.
Mm.
And so it was like, go out, use secondary market research, talk to ex-employees, do expert interviews at our company, and try to triangulate why they're so profitable. Because on paper, like we don't see why they would be so much more profitable than us.
Interesting.
It's very, very cool exercise. We ended up, figuring out that it was kind of the way they structured kind of how their sales team and this was tend to be a CPG company, but how their sales teams and their regional production facilities were managed.
Okay.
It was a very interesting case, kind of where the P&L stood within their organization was at a regional level rather than like a factory level.
Got it.
And it made their production processes like way more inefficient.
Or efficient,
because you had regions with well, you have like regions with like multiple factories or like sharing a factory,
right? Okay.
And so you have like so many internal reports that it made them kind of have a lot of line switches and
right.
inefficient routes and stuff like that kind of led actually to additional work for our firm, but just
cool.
being there for the first part of it I thought was kind of the real key piece, because talking to experts, doing secondary research, figuring out how competitive dynamics work within an industry, and connecting some of that stuff to profitability. That is like private equity 101. Great, I think great skills to bring to the table, no matter what deal you're looking at.
So it sounds like you kind of knew you wanted to do PE. And so when did you kind of, was there any sort of foundation or groundwork that you laid early on in your career at the Big Four? Like, you're not even in the city that you ended up going to. So how were you even able to recruit remotely? When did that start? Was it on cycle? Can you tell me, let's just start talking about a little bit of the private equity recruiting process and kind of how that went, and was it just,
for sure. I think I really did kind of parallel process kind of 2 paths.
Mm-hmm.
One was internally at the Big Four. I kind of raised my hand and said, I want to start doing M&A stuff. I want to switch over to our deals group, if possible.
Okay.
So it's and I think, as you mentioned before, it's really hard to maneuver inside these firms.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of set me up on like a few internal interviews to switch over, but like the timeline that they ended up giving me was like longer than a year.
And that was to get what's a transaction advisory services or some sort of TA, some sort of transaction valuation.
Right. Like deal advisory. Yeah.
So it sounds like you were considering banking. Like you were thinking, hey, I may have to get to banking first. Was that the thought?
I was thinking, I guess if you look in kind of the classic world of consulting, I was thinking that like the commercial diligence groups really might be a better step for me.
Okay.
Like, so I was looking at, anything that looks like an LEK or a Parthenon, or like a Bain private equity group, but at the Big Four level where, you're doing these, market research, customer interviews, stuff like that. I figured like that's, a great way to boost my resume. Then I'll go get an MBA and get to private equity. So on the side of that though, I was like, let's test the waters for private equity firms. Let's get in front of as many people as I can.
Right.
And see what happens. So I think some people are probably curious, like if I used recruiters. I tried like using a few recruiters. I think they just kind of wrote me off. I just didn't have the profile that screamed like I am a safe candidate to put in front of a client.
Of course. Yeah.
And
they were probably, they were scared.
You to talk to them, but
low GPA. And then you also had specifically, the very non-traditional background. They were like, I have all these bankers trying to get into PE. Why am I going to put a consultant from the Big Four? That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a few of them even like suggested like, hey, well, I think this investment bank might talk to you, or like you can do that, which is, I think like maybe if I didn't get into a private equity fund, maybe doing like consulting then banking, I could like then MBA could package that into a private equity story. It would have been also an interesting route, but this is like going to investment banking as like a very entry level person. So it kind of would have been starting over, and I wasn't really sure that was the best move.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Okay. So so you
okay.
No success with recruiters.
Recruiting steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you gotta, so first I'd say like LinkedIn is your friend. 100%. Like you need to, I got premium. You need to do something like that. Because I think that when you think about like the path of least resistance within the private equity world is you got to try and find people who have done it before. Firms that hire consultants in general was kind of one of the initial filters that I put on my search. And then second, you got to look for like alumni and stuff that, you can connect with, whether that's alumni of your Big Four consulting firm, like they might be in the firm, might be a little older or something like that. Might be someone that came from like the accounting side, that, was able to land at the fund. But then like undergrad alumni.
Right.
And really, I just started hitting the phones. I was kind of a cold call, shoot an email with a quick summary in my resume and just try to get a phone call where I could introduce myself.
What do you think your hit rate was on those?
Oh, man, pretty low.
5%?
Most people were willing to have, I'd say like
10.
Most people were willing to have a phone call.
Okay.
I know. And I'd say like I'd say like probably 25%.
That's pretty good.
It's higher than you think.
That's pretty good.
Because most people are like, if you phrase it in the right way of like, hey, looking to break into the industry, would love some help, love to hear about your fund, what you guys do. So usually like most people are willing, I think, to help and either grab a cup of coffee or talk to you on the phone. And that's really what I did until, you kind of talk to them, you get a sense of like, would they ever actually take a chance and interview you formally? And most times it was no. I will tell you that I think out of, the 20 or so firms that I had, coffee conversations with, and I think I did like 3 formal interviews.
Okay.
So you're talking like super low hit rate. And of those 3, like 1, I didn't even get past the first round, but 2 were like seriously considering me. And this is kind of, I think, for different reasons. So the one that I didn't end up working for was a specialist in like the healthcare industry.
Okay.
And it just happened that a lot of my cases happened to be in healthcare.
Right.
So they saw me as having like particular sector interest. They had hired consultants in the past they were kind of like a firm that does like out of every analyst class, they'll do like one consultant and the rest bankers, just because they like to, I don't know, have that in the mix for some reason. And, you know, I felt like it would be decent. It was a, you know, very good shop, very well known. Had done things with consultants in the past, but more of a traditional shop.
Right.
And then the other firm, which is where I ended up going to work, was, I told you, like almost all consultants.
Yeah.
From, you know, wide variety of firms. I'd say, you know, concentrated in like, you know, Bain and LEK. But you might get like Parthenon, you might get some like boutique consulting firms. But I figured, you know what, they're all former consultants. They kind of had a similar skill set. You know, even the MDs were former consultants. And speaking to them, I just got a sense that like they understand my background a lot more, and they'll know how to use me in the deal team, and like they know the skills that I bring to the table, and will teach me what I don't know. And you know, they know how to train consultants to be good in the private equity world.
Great. And so when you were doing the interviews in the formal interview process, was it, since it was a consulting kind of PE shop, did you have a lot of like case interviews, or did they give you an LBO modeling test, or did they just avoid that?
So they actually avoided the LBO test. They mentally kind of like walked through technicals that were kind of similar to my time in like interviewing for banking roles.
Yep.
The only LBO test that I had was at a firm that like was way more heavily towards bankers.
Right.
And I think it was like, they gave it to me and like, they knew I was going to like bomb it. They kind of wanted to see how far I got. I don't know. It was a very good experience, but I had these guys. So like ever since that happened though, I was like practicing LBO tests like crazy.
Yeah. You should have taken our course. You would have been fine.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I had the Wall Street Oasis Excel model. So, you know, I was trying to learn them, and even for this fund that was all former consultants, I thought, you know what, maybe they're just saving it for the final round. So I got to be ready anyways.
Yeah. So the one you were given at that fund. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is the one where I was ultimately successful. They didn't do Excel tests.
Okay.
Their kind of screening process was like a simulation. It was, and I think this is getting a little bit more common.
Yep.
Where firms either give you a deal that they looked at, or they give you a public company, and they say like, you know, they'll give it to you on like a Friday at 4:00, and they'll say, take the weekend, you know, come up with some thoughts on this business, maybe put together some slides, and come in on Monday and we'll talk about it. And to tell you the truth, I think that's the exact type of interview process I needed, because it gave me a chance to like actually put in the effort over that, you know, weekend, which no one likes to work on the weekends, but you know, I was like, this is my only shot at private equity. I got to work hard.
Right. How long did you work on it? How many hours did you put in? How many hours did you put in over that weekend?
A lot. Probably,
20 plus?
Probably 30 hours.
Yeah.
Because I knew I was like, you know what, I've been, you know, through this, you know, private equity interview process, I'm like getting one interview every 50 phone calls.
This is my shot. This is your shot.
You gotta shoot your shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I borrowed stuff that I picked up in consulting, you know, framed the market, picked out competitors, took a point of view on like this company, its growth rate, and even did like kind of a diligence exercise that I think really impressed them. Was like I called up a few of like their distributors and just like asked what they thought. And it was like, you know, it was like kind of doing my own expert interviews. And like, I think this fund saw that and they were like, this is our guy. It's scrappy. It's go out and get your own data. It's, you know, form an independent view.
Did you build a model with that, or no? Did they not care about that? Was it more just like you were framing the industry? Sorry, it's my banking background keeps pushing you towards the funnel. I'm just curious.
I know. I'm trying to remember. There was a like examine the financials and call out any trends you think are important.
Yep.
There's that. But the key point on that one was like the last recession, their like top line dropped 30%. Like that was the takeaway.
Right. Okay.
Rather than like, I think if I build an LBO with this amount of debt, I think you can pay this.
Right.
That really never became too much part of the discussion. It was like a yes, no, do we buy it? Do we not?
Got it.
And
okay.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like, I think that setup worked, but it was like kind of like a mock IC meeting for the, instead of a super day.
Right. So you were forced to go in and like,
in front of a couple.
Yep. You were forced to pitch it to the investment committee.
Yeah, a couple partners around the table. Yeah, you got to pitch. And they'd obviously looked at this deal, so they're actually experts, and they're going to know where you're starting to kind of spit some BS and where you actually took the time to learn reality.
Interesting. And so first off, was that a company that they actually invested in or not? Had they passed on it?
So this is one they passed on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the point of the simulation, is like really everything was good about this company, except for they were like really cyclical, and you wouldn't be able to you might not realize how cyclical they are, in parallel with the business cycle until you just looked at, you had to look at the financials and be like, look, a 30% top line drop.
Yeah.
After the recession.
Crush margins.
That is and it's like a death wish for any sort of leverage you would put on this business.
Right.
It would go to zero. So you spend the whole, your whole conversation talking about all the good things about this company until you get to your financials page, and they're like, yeah, how bad do you think that 30% drop is? They're supposed to say it's really, really bad. And in fact, we shouldn't be talking about this company at all because there's no way around it. And,
right.
That's the answer.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
But interesting exercise. And I think those simulations, as they get more popular, they can test, how well you're prepared in a very real life scenario. And I think consulting prepares you well for stuff like that.
For sure. It'll be interesting to see if private equity firms start if they continue just to pluck primarily from investment banks, or if they start actually considering a little bit more on the more of the consultants, over the years. I think firms that use less financial engineering, use less leverage, more on the growth equity kind of earlier stage, do value the consulting experience more for obvious reasons. It's more about framing the industry and understanding it. So.
Yeah. And I think we were almost like a little bit growth buyouts.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to have double-digit growth rates in all our companies. And that's, I think, what led us down that route. Because you're right. Earlier stage businesses that are more about revenue growth, that's where the skill set does really become valuable.
Cool. Excuse me. Well, listen, is there anything else you'd like to share before we call the pod? Thanks so much for all your wisdom. Is there anything else, one key takeaway you'd give your younger self?
Yeah, I guess my key takeaway would be look for the experiences that you think you can spin and gain value from, right? People understand that, consulting as a career is kind of a little bit of a random walk. You mm-hmm. gather a variety of experiences and exposure to sectors, but trying to see the actual valuable skill sets that you take away from each project and weave that into a story can get you to a place like private equity. And I think, over time, I do think the consulting skill set is going to become more common in the industry because I think when, hardcore investing will be where the returns continue to be, and being very operationally involved will become, increasingly important in this industry as it becomes more competitive.
Great.
I think a lot of firms are kind of noticing that now, and they're going to look for that operational talent, and maybe they'll start hiring more consultants.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for all your time and all your wisdom. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.